Hey guys, I'm Katie Room from Parapsis Press, and today I am here with Blake Carpenter to interview him for the release of his brand new cover for Deathbringer.
Hello, good evening.
So today is just going to be pretty casual. We're going to wander around whatever topic that we hit upon and enjoy. Tomorrow I will post a actually written interview that we did prior to this to my website, parapsispress.com. So if you guys are upset at us at any point for wandering from the trail of the a more structured interview, that will be available tomorrow. Just real quick, I'll say hi to some people in the chat. Hi to Patrick, who has nothing to promote, and to Benjamin Crace. I think I said that right. To William Jeffrey Rankin and Michael F. Kane. And Blake, of course. And
Hello.
Jonathan Sugar. All right. Thank you guys so much for coming, and please don't hesitate to hit me with any questions or comments that you have for Blake here. All right. Just making sure that I'm caught up and that I don't miss something from you guys. Okay. So, Blake, would you like to just start by talking a little bit about Deathbringer for people who may not be familiar with the book?
Sure. Deathbringer is a book that's about 13 years old at this point. Published exactly 1 year on Wednesday.
Nice.
So it took a good little while to cook, to get ready. Numerous incarnations turned it into what it is. In its current published form, Deathbringer is the story of Inga, who's this farm girl who's getting married. And as everything's getting ready and the ceremony's happening, her mother pulls her aside and says, oh, by the way, we've inherited this super powerful sword, which no one's allowed to know about and could potentially spell the death of our family, along with having killed everybody else that you may have known and loved at one point. So don't tell anybody. So spoilers. But basically, the wedding goes on, and a noblewoman named Yenda shows up, and things just start from there. And I will say that in the first chapter, Inga dies, which is both a spoiler and not a spoiler, because the whole rest of the book is her being brought back and having to retrieve this sword, being given 1 week to get it back, or else she's going to die permanently. And then things progress from there. That's basically the Cliff Notes version of Deathbringer, as much as I'm able to sum it up.
And Inga kind of goes on a quest to avenge herself and everybody else who died, of course. I mean, it was her wedding. Everyone was there, but
yeah, it was in terms of phrasing it like that. Yeah, that's definitely what it is. It's a self-revenge story, which admittedly is not done all that much. Again, Deathbringer is a really weird book for me just because of how many different ways and shapes and forms and stories it included. I think that Inga was a villain in 2 different books until she finally got the book herself. Not to go too deep into it, but back, in the 12, 13 years, this would have been, the mid 2000s, whatever. And the young adult thing was huge. And of course, back then I'm a writer like everybody else, querying like everybody else, and young adults taking off. So let's try to do that. So I wrote a story about a sword which hasn't actually come into the larger mythos of the Spell Sword saga. Entirely different character, entirely different story. And Inga shows up as this necromantic ice queen femme fatale kind of character. Very, very different from what she is now. But the premise of that story was that the sword, which was the Deathbringer, and you had the Deathbringer even back then, the sword was killing her, and she wanted to find a way to sever herself from it.
Mm.
So ultimately, this character, in my mind, this character is a whole lot more interesting than the entire book I wrote twice. So ultimately, it was like, well, what can I do with this character as a main character? And she kind of just went back and forth. There was the whole anti-hero thing, sort of a god of war type character, Kratos, for people who are familiar with that. Someone who was kind of on a war against the world, and that didn't really work. And then I kind of sized it down, basically condensed it into the absolute minimum form it could be, which is it's the cliche of the farm boy who goes off to save the world. But what happens to the farm boy if the villain kills the farm boy in chapter one? What's the rest of the book look like? So Inga ultimately, and Deathbringer ultimately became the story of a character who is cliche in one way and very much a subversion, hopefully, without it turning people off, because people hate subversions anymore. That's the kind of story it turned into, was a very small, isolated, intimate almost story of revenge and sorrow and bittersweet loss and that sort of thing. Because
Yeah.
in some ways the book ends with a happy ending. In some ways it was never going to have a happy ending, because of the fact that she and everybody that she grows up knowing and loving dies at the end of chapter one, which again is sort of a spoiler, but not. That's the whole point of the story. It's mentioned on the back cover. The back cover talks about how she's murdered and then brought back to life. This is not a secret, but you still have to kind of frame it that way, which is the entire point of the story is she loses everything. So what the hell does she do after that? So that's the very rambling answer, hopefully, of your question.
Yeah, awesome.
Mhm.
Okay. I should have pulled up the original cover. I did not. I have the brand new cover pulled up. Let me see if I can really quick. I bet I can.
I
I
don't.
bet I can
Not
quick.
not to deviate too much. No, I don't have it either. I'm sorry. I have the. I had thought I had the old one, but no, I don't.
Okay, here we
It's
go.
on a different machine. So, okay.
Drum roll, Michael Caine says. Okay, so here's my review of Deathbringer. So I have already read the book, you guys. And like Blake said, it was published last year about this time. So it's getting a brand new cover 1 year later.
February 14th. So anybody who has an old hard copy, I guess technically you could call those a collector's item, because that cover is going away. So there was some nice Twitter rando who just said, "Hey, I like it. I'm going to buy it." So I said, "You might want to wait," but you didn't want to wait. So that
Yeah.
cover will be gone in about 48 hours from now.
So this is the original cover by Mike Gallagher, right?
Yes. Basically, I had no money. And when you're a guy with no money, you basically ask for favors, and he fit my asking price, which was somewhere between free. So he's a graphic. I think he does graphic design. He's a. I'm going to go all over the place. Anybody who's read Kursova magazine, Mike has been pretty kind enough to say if you buy some ad copy, he'll design your ad for free. So he knows his way around a Photoshop, if nothing else. So he made that. It was pretty much slapped together. I don't know how much he did or didn't, how much effort he had to put into it. I will say I'm very much going to miss the title itself. I like the whole, the H and the B coming together for some kind of sword motif. So I will miss that a little bit. But basically, Mike was nice enough to make a cover. And when it came time for me to get a new one, because I wanted all the covers to be sort of visually consistent, I kind of went to him first and said, "Are you okay with me doing that?" He gave me my blessing. So he gave me his blessing rather. So I was able to go out and get something else for that.
Awesome. Yeah, there's some things to like about this cover. One being the skull on the sword, because it really highlights the sort of grim,
That
dark
was
fantasy element.
that was honestly his creation. I'm going to try not to go too much into spoilers as I'm talking about the story.
Sure.
That's not mentioned in the book, so it's not mentioned. So if people want to imagine, this bitch in black sword with a skull on the on the hilt, that's awesome. But
Maybe
that was not part of my original creative process. So he threw that in
that's
and said, "Hey,
funny.
doesn't this look cool?" I was like, "Yeah, man, that's it's awesome." So we're
It
we're
must
rolling
have
with it.
just the cover must have just like made that impression on me that was book accurate. That's really funny. Um, so in your mind, it didn't necessarily have that skull motif built into the sword as part of its design.
I'm gonna as we go in and out. I'm gonna talk about the swords here. There are ones that
Sure.
are in the book, ones that will be featured in future books. All of them are visually different. I will say there's some similarities between them as we go. You've got your broadswords, your rapiers. You've got there's a I don't want to get too sword nerdy. There's another sword in the next book, similar to the German Zweihander, which was literally a two-handed sword you had to fight with both hands. So there's one like that. Scimitars all over the place. Very very visually different was the whole point of me doing that, which was kind of I probably started this story kicking around. Bits and pieces of it probably are 30 years old at this point. So there's probably some teenage Blake thinking, hey, this would be cool if there's this sword is different from that one. So the skull on Deathbringer is there's got to be a term for it. It's not lore accurate, but not inaccurate too, because it's not mentioned. So I'm
Sure.
perfectly fine with people imagining it that way. The new cover does not have a skull on it. Sorry, but it is a nice image. It definitely grabs you. I was happy with this cover for a really long time. So there's a lot about it that I like. There's more about it that I like than what I don't like. But again, because I wanted all the covers to be very similar in style, which I have the others planned up here, is hopefully I'll be able to make them similar to what the new one will look like.
Nice. All right. Do you want to say anything else about the original before I pull up the new one?
Anything else I've mentioned? I will say that this was not my creation. The tagline that he puts on the back, which sorry for the glare. The vengeance born in love and tempered with blood. That's all Mike as well. He created that, and I will say that I'm kind of partial to that. I very much like that. Which means now, unfortunately, I got to thing up a snappy line for the other covers when they come out. But maybe he won't charge me too much for those.
Nice. Okay. Share this tab instead. Here we go, guys. There she is.
There she is.
Wow.
So the guys that made the Way of Mortals cover, the Indian steampunk that I brought out on Halloween, I honestly liked that one so much. They're MiblArt, MiblArt. I don't know how you pronounce it. They did such a bang up job with that cover that I was like, let's go back and see what they were able to come up with for this. Obviously, there's the sword similarity. They gave me originally a cover version with a whole face, which I wasn't as big a fan of.
Sure.
More because that's just a personal taste. Is that if let me give you an example. Anybody who reads Lord of the Rings and has seen Lord of the Rings, Elijah Wood is your Frodo for now and forever. Like it or not, your brain just subconsciously does it. That's the way we're wired. So Inga's a blonde. It's part of the story that she has blonde hair. That's very uncommon where she's from. So that part is included. The sword is included. It's all black. It's got some kind of yellow highlights, some kind of glow to it. It's got the wire wrapped hilt. It's a broadsword style. So that came out. That's front and center. Obviously, the title isn't as, again. I don't have the the funky, the funky sword portion here, which again I really like, but I'm willing to sacrifice that for what hopefully is a more visually interesting cover. You've got a woman holding a sword. What is she? Why is the sword black? Why does she have airships behind her? It's sort of steampunk, but sort of not. It's a really, calling it dark fantasy is really not a great way to classify the story. It blends genres a lot more, I think, than I originally planned when I wrote it. In its earlier incarnations, it was very much more of a high fantasy type story. There was a lot of horse riding, which is just my personal pet peeve. I hate it when parts of a book talk about characters riding on a horse. So I have tried, and I will continue to try to avoid horseback riding as a way to get from here to there. So there's no trains on it. The characters ride a train. That's trains are interesting. One of my kids loved trains growing up, so that was a lot of having to do that. So that's sort of the image. I wanted something that was more distinct to the kind of time period / fantasy mix that the original that the book tries to bring out.
Yeah, Donald Wheatfield says definitely more evocative of a story. The other one feels too generic by comparison.
I'm gonna let him pat himself on the back, but Michael Caine, who's actually in your chat, was nice enough to write a long form review of the book, both on Twitter and on Amazon. Thank you for that. This was an idea I'd been kicking around for a while, was buying a new cover.
Yeah.
But basically his review kind of kicked it into high gear because the sequel's not ready yet and sadly won't be ready for a while. So the plan was I was going to wait for the sequel to come out, get 2 covers, both for the new one and for Deathbringer, and then just release them at the same time. But it's like that could potentially still be up to a year away, which is unfortunate.
Sure.
I've got special needs kids at home. I've got 5 kids total. Life is insane. I work 40 plus hours a week. Deathbringer in its original incarnation, I was able to write back when I didn't have any of that stuff. So that's kind of why. Let's get the cover out now. Let's get potentially more eyeballs on it. Hopefully more sales. Haha, I'm a writer, so please buy my stuff. But there's no reason to kind of sit on my hands for a year hoping that people are willing to settle for an admittedly not as good cover. Hopefully Mike doesn't get offended by that if he hears me say it. But something that was a little more professional, and I am not an artistic person. Unfortunately, I lost that a long time ago. So something like this feels a lot more better. Sorry for words not working quite right, but that was the idea.
Yeah, I like this cover quite a bit. I think it communicates a lot about the story. The main character being an important one. I don't know that people would have guessed from the cover of the other one that your main character was female, especially.
What surprised me a lot was people saying they felt like the cover just created a generic fantasy.
Yeah.
Which I suppose makes some sense. I had never thought about it, but again, I'm not as big on book covers, like it or not, because the time I've got to read, I'm doing it on a phone. So I'm buying an ebook and I'll look at a cover once and then I never look at it again. So having a physical hard copy book of the new cover, yeah, you see it a lot. It's a lot more visually distinct because you're looking at it. You're looking at it every time you open it and you close it. So seeing that from the old one, yeah, I understand that.
And I'm excited that it does include the airships. I remember when I came across that portion in the book, because dirigibles are just very briefly mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
The train is described very beautifully in such a way that when the dirigibles are mentioned, you're like, oh, this is definitely Gaslamp. It's not just like, they have a train. No, like they have flying things in the sky.
It didn't work to put her on an airship, a dirigible. That's what I call it. Way of Morals is like this too, where in a lot of my research, I would find terms that are obviously archaic and not used anymore. Right before we came on, somebody posted on Twitter about a steam powered motorcycle. Steam powered motorcycles were actually a thing. They were called velocipedes. So I use that word. That's what they call them. So dirigibles are not a thing in the story because there was no way to really get Inga onto one because she lives out in the sticks, out in the boonies. Um, Trains were kind of ubiquitous 100 years ago. Everywhere was connected by a train, a lot more than in Europe than the U.S. But it wasn't hard to get on a train. Train riding in the world of Deathbringer is for the masses. It's for the poors. It's for the people that have a little bit of money that want to go traveling somewhere. If you've got an airship to ride, either you're rich and you own one, or you're able to pay the company that owns them to go places. So that's going to come out more in the second book. There's train travel, there's air travel. One's
Nice.
obviously faster than the other. One is more expensive than the other. So there was no way to get a farm girl from literally out, living out in BFE onto an airship, but they're still part of that reality. So hopefully people don't feel like I'm kind of false advertising. They've got 3 airships on the cover and she doesn't actually ride in one, but they're coming. So I'm working on it. It's just a matter of time. I'll get there.
Let's see. Yeah. Anne, hi, thanks for coming. Says, "Oh crap, there's this dude whose stuff I'm gonna want to buy. How could the Iron Age do this to me?"
Darn. Okay. I give you permission to buy all the books at one time. There's only 2 of them, and just get it out of the way. Go right ahead and do that. No judging here.
Really no judging. I'm
No,
building
no.
out a library here, and it's
Yeah.
I'm gonna be doing another one of my $100 of indie books here pretty
Oh,
soon.
nice. Okay,
So
perfect.
yeah, it's so yeah. Seriously, no judgment. Just
No,
just
no,
buy
no.
it.
We like people buying books in the stream. So
Absolutely.
go ahead and buy as many copies as you want. I won't complain one little bit.
She wonders when the new cover will be available on Amazon.
Anniversary is again the 14th, which is less than, it's the 12th today. So the plan was I will push out the changes on the evening of the 13th. Amazon takes anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 hours to do its thing. So I'll try to get those close to midnight, and the changes for both the ebook and the paperback should be out on the morning of the 14th. So by the time you wake up, they should be live. Buy a copy, buy your friends a copy, buy your dog a copy. I'm good. I'm good with all those. But I haven't really been hitting the whole, hey, buy my stuff on the Twitterverse lately because this has been waiting in the wings. So I've just been kind of quiet on that. I haven't been beating the buy my stuff drum as much as I might have in the past.
Does anybody know how Amazon handles books that they've printed ahead of time? Because I know sometimes
Pretty
if
sure. Pretty sure. Sorry to interrupt. Pretty sure Amazon is print on demand. So when you make an order, they print a book. It's unless you're again one of the bigger names, which I am not, but I'm pretty sure
sure.
for small fries like me, it's print on demand. If 10 people order copies, they print 10 books.
Okay.
So they keep everything on file so that they can print it as soon as somebody requests it.
Right. I wasn't sure. I know sometimes they'll print some ahead of time and to like
Oh,
hold in a particular warehouse if
then I could
there's
I could stand corrected. I did not know that. So that
I
is possible then.
and it could be that they don't do it for, you know, that or that there has to be like a certain amount of demand in a certain area for that to
Right.
happen. But
Right. Maybe your sales rank has to hit higher than X
right.
number. Possible.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. But it occurred to me as a possibility. But uh if you guys order the book with the brand new cover and it comes with the old cover, let us know. That'll be the
Yeah.
answer to our question. All right. I've got a whole bunch of questions for you, I think, in the chat.
Oh,
So I just want to
go right ahead.
make sure I hit those up. Um, you guys are talking about the book in the chat, and that makes me so happy.
No complaints here. I'll be honest. I caught one of those questions scrolling by as you were talking, and somebody asked for how many years has this book actually been, in process. And
Yes.
when I said 12, 13 years, I was not kidding. I one of my old files is dated from 2010, and that's probably not even the oldest incarnation of it, because again, we're popping up here. The Spell Swords was a process that probably began back when the old science fiction book of the club monthly, back when the book clubs were still a thing. I bought a copy of Fred Saberhagen, if I'm pronouncing his right name, his Book of Swords. It was an omnibus edition, but I had 6 or 10 other books to read at the time, and I just never got to it. But the idea, admittedly, is very similar from what little I know about it. His book has more to do with kind of an end of the past the end of the world sort of thing, where a bunch of, I think they're Greek gods or like an old pantheon of deities creates a whole bunch of weapons and throws them out into the world, and they cause a whole bunch of chaos and such things. The Spell Swords is not that, but he has one sword that does this, one sword that does that. So in some day, is that I'll admit there's a little bit of there's a bit of derivative process coming from that, but there's nothing new created anymore anyway. So the other inspiration is Elric of Melniboné, Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion stuff. Some people like it, some people love it, some people absolutely loathe it. The caveat is that, just like Saberhagen, I haven't read any Elric stuff, but I would be, spitting to the wind trying to pretend that, oh no, a black sword named Deathbringer has nothing to do with a black sword named Stormbringer. I'm not gonna pretend that wasn't the inspiration. So I'm waiting to read some of those, maybe first book in each, hopefully more, when Spell Swords is done, whether that's a trilogy or quadrology. That was the original idea. I would like to get to those eventually, but I'm kind of insulating myself from that, so I don't have any more leakage from their original ideas into mine. But yeah, Deathbringer's probably, Deathbringer's old enough to drink, old enough to vote, probably has kids of its own at this rate. Just repeat really, really quick the original story, which is this universe, this world, these swords as they are distinct in this book and the sequels, is probably 12 to 13 years old total, probably.
Nice. Benjamin says, we're all rewriting the stories we love, and there's no shame in that.
A lot of my stuff, I would say, is, I don't have as much time to read anymore. Like I said, I've got kids and work and wife and all sorts of stuff. So a lot of the stuff that I pull inspiration from is stuff that I read, years and years ago. Some of it's more recent. I really like Jim Butcher's stuff, Harry Dresden stuff. I absorbed those. Those are really, really good. But more, past stuff is David Eddings. He and his wife wrote a lot of stuff. He's got, apparently some things came out. He died probably close to 15 years ago. Apparently some less than savory things came out about him a few years ago. But you got to isolate the art from the artist to some degree. I'm not one of those people who say, oh, well, X person did this, so you can never read their stuff again. I didn't read Eddings's Belgariad stuff. That's what he's really well known for. That's where the cliche of the farm boy going off to save the world, if he didn't invent it, it's very much sort of in its infancy there back in the 80s. But I didn't get exposed to him until he wrote his Elenium trilogy, which is, paraphrased, it's Catholic knights doing magical stuff and going off to kill a fallen god. That's what the Elenium is, which I'm not Catholic, but that admittedly has kind of colored my vision of Catholicism to some degree. And like it or not, on the Twitterverse, I've fallen in with a lot of Catholic people. So hopefully they don't hold that against me. But a lot of stuff he wrote, ignoring the riding on horses everywhere. It was the fantasy with a little bit of humor thrown in. I try to do that. I try to, keep my stuff light enough. I think you can talk about darker subjects without losing the enjoyment of the reading, and even an opportunity to throw in, a laugh line here or there. Admittedly, one of my favorite parts of Deathbringer by far, and I'm going to try not to spoil this one. It's when she's facing down Yenda and Yenda's mother, which who's also named Yenda. A thing used to be back about a century or so ago is men were junior. That's why if you're named after your dad, you're named junior. Women were the elder and the younger. So that's kind of fallen by the wayside. We don't really do that anymore. But that's why there are two Yendas in the book. It's Yenda the elder, who's the mother who owns Frostbite, one of these super powerful spell swords, and Yenda the younger, who's really the main antagonist of the book. And the elder talks to Inga about how she's ruined her party and she's caused all this ruckus and chaos. And Inga basically says, that's just what farm girls do. We spread shit wherever we go, which is the only real line of profanity in the book. But it's just a line I just really, really liked. So I just left it in. I even I'm one of those crazy heathen people that thinks you can use profanity, to some degree. Way of Mortals had a little more profanity than Deathbringer did. But Deathbringer, I tried to create sort of my own twist on the whole profane thing so that characters can do the swearing thing without swearing. But sometimes that just doesn't work. You can only throw so many imitation swears in before they just kind of lose all their potency. So you gotta pop a stinger in there, here or there, where it fits.
Okay. Let's see. GameQuest had such a fantastic book. Blake is the king of the perfectly paced, bite-sized chapter, as demonstrated throughout this book.
Oh,
so that wasn't a question, but
no, compliments are good. I like those too. So, there's the whole what's the perfect chapter size discussion that happens, a billion times a day on the internet. I shoot for 2,000 to 3,000 words. Some of them are super long. I want to say the last ending chapters were probably double or maybe triple that. So you go as far until it feels like, okay, this is where the chapter needs to end. So, you got to fade to black and then you move on to the next scene. But that's basically what I aim for, is that it's usually 2,000 to 3,000 is your minimum. If you have to add more, go on from there until it feels like, okay, this is the place to stop.
In a similar vein, Patrick said the fighting description was well done, not too lengthy, but more than somehow the Emperor fought. How hard is fighting?
You are making that up. Please tell me that is not a real line of dialogue in a real book somewhere, because that will just make me all kinds of sad. In terms of pacing a fight scene like that, Inga's the point of view character for everything. She's the whole reason that readers only know as much as they know. She's a girl who grew up on the back end of nowhere and planned on living the whole rest of her life on the back end of nowhere. A lot of stories who feature some kind of, I keep using the term farm boy, but some kind of character who's from a very isolated point of view setting to expand into the whole rest of the book, because you don't want to stay in one place for forever. But those characters are a lot more competent maybe than they should come off. So that much is explained throughout the first part of the book, is that she knows that her mother wants her to learn how to fight with a sword. Why? She's living on a farm. Farmers don't need to fight with a sword, but her mother is this overbearing, protective kind of character who tells her, well, you're going to do it whether you want to or not. So that's how Inga learns. She's all self-taught. So she, by which I mean me, creates these terms for fighting, almost sort of like, the cliche kung fu fighting, like, way of 1,000 fists or whatever. So, she's got her, and I'm pulling a blank here. So, her, turn, it's one term for turning halfway, or it's another term for turning all the way around, or guarding up with one hand versus two of them, that sort of thing. That was how I wanted to do it, so that a reader who knew nothing about sword fighting was able to follow along, or somebody who knows a lot about sword fighting could say, okay, this is believable that somebody who's self-taught for 10 years or however many years it is. I don't think I actually ever specify how old Inga is in the book. I've always kind of imagined her as very early 20s. So let's roll with that. Somebody who's been teaching to fight for 10, 15 years is believable. That's the whole gist I'm going for, is that whether you know a lot about sword fighting or not, it makes sense in your head because the terms she uses are terms that you're familiar with anyway. So not a whole lot of, spinning and jumping and flipping and Jedi mind fighting and, all of that stuff. That's not what this is.
Michael Caine said, yeah, I liked how Blake treated fighting, how it was more about how she thought than about fighting than the actual movements of the fight, which kind of lines up with what you're saying.
Right. I needed a character, again, who lived in the middle of nowhere to be able to hold her own against characters who have been learning how to use a sword their entire life. Because, like it or not, these are weapons of extremely potent potential, but they're also tools. They're also things that you use to defend yourself. It's not really brought up as much in this book, but there are guns in this particular reality. There was an introduction. I don't think I included it. I ultimately cut it at the very end, which was talking about what does the world look like where gunpowder was invented less than 100 years ago. Everybody's been used to fighting, hand to hand, and then all of a sudden you can dispatch your opponent from 50 or 100 or however many yards a bullet can fly. The technology in this particular world is very similar to World War I, so very, very early 1900s. That was on purpose. So it's probably going to come up more in following books because it's one of those plot threads that I haven't forgotten about. But how do noble families with extreme amount of power and influence who've been learning to defend themselves with essentially a 3-foot chunk of metal, what do you do against somebody who can put a bullet between your eyes? So that's a threat. That's obviously something that a bunch of them aren't going to like very much. So that's going to change the nature of warfare in this particular world as well, which will be expanded upon in as the story goes along.
Awesome. Let's see. Michael Caine asks, you say the story took many forms over the years. What was the first idea or inspiration that started the whole process?
Well, I did mention the Book of Swords and the Elric. That was probably the progenitor, as in where the first seeds started being planted. But that's boring. I've already given you that answer. So let's come up with something else. In terms of the first inspiration that started this book, I mentioned David Eddings earlier. I would say he's probably one of the biggest inspirations of my writing as a whole. So when I mentioned the Bulgaria, that was on purpose because, again, that was the very beginning of the farm boy goes out to save the world. And I don't want to repeat myself again, but what kind of story comes from a farm boy or a farm girl in this case who doesn't want to go out and save the world? She wants to live where she's at. She wants to get married and she wants to have children. She wants to grow old. She has her entire life ripped away from her. What does that do to a character like that? Somebody who doesn't have any delusions of grandeur, somebody who's very much the antithesis of what the villain of the story is. Yenda the Younger is this very bombastic, loud, egotistical angry woman who believes that she should have whatever she wants, whatever she's entitled to is what she gets, because that's how she was raised. She's a princess, essentially. That's not the term that's used. There's the matriarchs, which run the family, and there are the first daughters, who are the princesses. They're the heiresses. They're the ones that are waiting in the wings to inherit the swords when the matriarchs die. So Inga is very much not that, but she becomes essentially a matriarch overnight. Her mother dies, the only other living relative she has. She, she has to figure out how to make her way in a world that she wants nothing to do with. So I think that was probably one of the major inspirations for this book as it exists now. Is what kind of character goes on a story that she wants nothing to do with? What does that story look like? How do you write that story? How do you make it interesting? How do you get people to care? I mean, like it or not, authors have to get somebody to care, or they're going to read the first 10 pages, put you down, and never think about you again. Um, what's that saying, that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference?
Mm.
I never want somebody to be indifferent to anything that I write. If you grab either of these, or if you grab any of the stories in the anthologies that I've written, I don't want you to not care. I want you to get to the end of the story. You can hate the story, you can love the story, but just don't not care about it, no matter what you do. So that's probably the inspiration for the story as it is now, which is somebody who doesn't want to take part in the story that she has to actually take part in. What is that, and why should a reader care about it? That is probably what it boils down to ultimately. Why do you care about somebody who wants to do something, has to do something she doesn't want to do? So I think that's the answer to that question. Hopefully that's an interesting answer.
Yeah. Would you talk a little bit about the matriarchal society and where your inspiration for that came from, and like how you thought about the way that it worked?
My when I'm coming up with a story, some Michael Harris, I think that's his name on Twitter, asked this either today or in the last day or two, which is, how do you start? What does world building look like? How do you start writing a story? And I said, basically, I always start with a question. Question being, what is a spell sword? Okay, a spell sword's not a thing; it doesn't exist. But if you lump those two words together, they become a thing. Spell swords are now a thing because I've written about them. What are they? What do they do? What kind of world do they live in? Who uses them? Who doesn't? Who loves them? Who hates them? That sort of thing. Or it's building off of that, which is the other question I phrased, the way of mortals tie in with, well, you've got a story about assassins. What if the assassins are demon possessed? What kind of world has demon possession as a regular thing, as a thing that people actually want and actually search for? So not to go too far in the weeds on that. The matriarchal society, and I may embarrass myself with this, but I have to be completely honest. The idea of women using weapons is admittedly not as much of a thing. We're in somewhat of a post-patriarchal society, but up to 50 years ago, men went out and did the fighting. Men went out and they killed the woolly mammoth and dragged it back to the lair. That's what men do. Women doing things that they aren't naturally supposed to do is, again, an interesting idea. What kind of world puts women in charge of everything? People like to, sorry for the general terms. I've seen it said by people that say, if women ruled the world, there'd never be war, there'd never be bloodshed. It's like, have you read any piece of European history? Do you know who Catherine the Great was? If that's the Russian monarch I'm remembering, right? Women are notoriously, bad at leading, because if they want to if they want to impress people, they send out a whole other bunch of men, it's been, to die. So that's the kind of world that the spell swords live in, is that these are women in charge of weapons that give them an extraordinary amount of power and influence. But there are men too, and men have to go do what the women say. Like it or not, that's just the world they live in. The other thing, and admittedly, this is a plot idea that I have since dropped, is teenage me thinking, sorry, just try not to get too TMI, but weapons and women with blood and that particular bodily function, which we'll leave alone. It was like, does this tie into that? There's a very there's a part where it talks about the moon cycles that kind of tie into whether a sword is powerful or not. That much is left over from the original idea. I got rid of that a long time ago, but that's the honest answer. Is that's why there's still a patriarchy in this world. Is once upon a time, little Blake Carpenter said, what about women using swords, and how does that tie into anatomy working, and is blood a thing? Because blood powers the weapons. They have to physically cut themselves and feed their blood to the sword. This is a book about blood magic, essentially. These are tools used by wizards to perform blood magic, if you really want to think about it that way. And spoilers or not spoilers, that's going to come into the story too. Is there's an imitation technology called spell steel, which are these tools that people have that imitates the form of a spell sword. In the first part of the book, it's talked about how Inga uses a hair piece, which is called bright steel, which has to do with light manipulation, so it changes the color of her hair. There's a talk about growing grass for the wedding that they're going to perform, and they use green steel to make the grass grow. So that's the idea, is that you have X steel, spell steel, to do this sort of magical stuff so that anybody can use it. But eventually the spell steel tools and weapons wear out, whereas these swords don't. And these, again, swords, to again bring it back to the original question, are controlled by women. So women controlling the world in a world where there are obviously two sexes, what does that look like in comparison to this, in comparison to the world we live in? And giving them a sword, a physical weapon, which, like it or not, sword is a very masculine weapon, thrusting, cutting, slicing, doing violent things. Swords are used for thousands of years to assert their will on weaker people. If you give that to a woman, what does a woman do with it? And again, I apologize if this is coming off as a little TMI, but this is the way that the brain does what it does. Is what's an interesting idea, and what is usable in a book that is interesting to the reader.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating. I think I said in my review that it made me think more about other things that were happening, sort of normal things that happen in a fantasy. Uh,
Mhm.
One of the biggest is the romance, and the way that, as a reader, you think it should progress. Because their roles were largely reversed, I wasn't confident that it was going to progress in the same way, and so I paid more attention to their scenes. It had the effect of adding a layer of tension to things.
The romance I tried to play as realistic as possible, which is asking me the question, if my wife is murdered and I've got a week to get back the thing that brought me back to life, essentially, am I going to fall for the next face that comes along and admittedly is interested in me? Kale, the supporting male character, is very interested. He wants Inga to succeed. He wants her to get her revenge. He also has a personal reason for that I want to go into much. Anybody who's read it knows what I'm talking about. But there's even a scene about 2/3 through the book where, and I deliberately did this on purpose, it sort of looks like he leans in, like, oh, okay, is this the time where they're going to kiss? And she shuts him down. She's like, no, I'm just not interested. And I'm going to, again, deviate a little bit, because I write female characters a lot more than male characters. And like it, fine, tiptoeing or not, women are very emotional creatures. Men are very logical ones. So if you've got a Ingvar whose whole family dies, and he meets Kelly, and Kelly's going to help him get his revenge, he's thinking logically about a situation like that, which, oh, well, she's leaning in to kiss me. Do I really want to kiss her? As opposed to this book, which is, hey, the love of my life, who I've known since we were essentially, whatever the equivalent is, elementary school, just got murdered in front of my eyes and then brought back to life and then died again. I have no interest in romantic anything. Now, we're planting the seeds for the future. So, whether Kale's the main romantic interest or not in future books, obviously that's the whole point of putting that part in now, so that when it comes up later, it can either be mentioned or remembered, or the readers will even remember. It's like, oh, okay, he's leaning in this time, and they've had 6 months or a year together as opposed to 6 days. What happens then?
Sure. Patrick
that
says
was kind of the way I was going.
Nice. Patrick says he didn't trust Kale until his sister's house. I'm not going to expand too much on that to get into spoilers, but
very bad decision. I'm not sure anybody should trust Kale, but I come from a large family of redheads. Unfortunately, this is what it is. But redhead being emotionally, bombastic people is a cliche for a reason, because that's just the way a lot of redheads are. I've got 2 siblings and a mom who are like that, and that's just the way they are. So that was very much the reason why I made him that way. That's his personality. That's what he does. He's loud and all about, I won't say everything's about him. I will say he likes to be involved in everything as a character. And then that kind of comes back to bite him in that, he has to kind of let his guard down a little bit. And he's like, why do I need to tell you personal things about myself? She's like, well, you told everything personal about me, so it's your turn. So he kind of has to have that moment of vulnerability where it's probably not in his general nature as a character.
Just gonna check my list of questions from people here.
Fire away. I mean, I can. The worst I can do is say I can't tell you that yet. But ask anything. I'm game.
You talked a little bit about world building earlier. What do you find about it that's hardest, and how do you conquer it?
I am gonna have to go for a cheap kind of answer, which is to say that's never a problem for me. And I'm sorry, that is not the answer I want to give people, because hey, here's how I solve for X. That's not the answer. I think if I have to pick something that's the hardest, the things that's the hardest is there's an idea that I really, really like, and I really, really want to keep it, and I just can't. And you gotta cut something somewhere, because ultimately, whether you're writing fantasy or not, you still have a set of rules you got to stick to. Everybody knows that. If you tried to write something, knowing how to fit your original concept to keep it the original concept, so that it's front and center. The spell swords are the absolute front and center of the story. They're the front and center of the cover for a good reason. That's the whole point. If I threw something out there that just said, so what if all of a sudden you've got spell spears, or you've got spell guns, or whatever, those are potentially cool ideas, but it completely negates the entire point of a spell sword. I've got glare going on here, but a spell sword saga. That's the whole point. These are the main attraction, guys. So you don't want to throw so many things into the pot that everything just turns into a mush. So, it would be, I'll bring back an example of one of the failed books that I wrote where Inga wasn't the main character. Real brief, because it doesn't matter as much anymore. Character has a family member who's murdered, and Inga literally kidnaps the corpse. That's the whole point. She needs another spell sword user to use the sword, but she takes one half, it doesn't have the other. So the whole point is bringing these two things together. The main character has the sword. Inga has the family member that can use it. bring them together. What happens? There's a really cool scene, literally like the last page of that particular book, where they've completed the quest. They've helped the dead family member depart, and they're off to wherever the hereafter is in this particular reality. And it's literally out of a movie, and that'll tell you just how long ago I wrote this, because it was probably so badly written. Inga comes out of her ice castle riding a freaking dragon, like something out of World of Warcraft. It's Arthas coming back, that sort of thing. And that probably was the inspiration for that. That's a really cool idea, but it doesn't tell the story in a way that's a good way to tell the story. Inga riding an ice dragon, that's a really cool idea, but that wasn't a good story. I probably put 500,000 words into the world of Agareth and the Spellsword Saga until I wrote a single word of this book. That's how much work went into this. Not to toot my own horn. That's there's a reason it's 13 years before it came along, is that it took that long to figure out what a good book looked like. Which was the best possible book that I could use. I've still got all of that old stuff, on a hard drive somewhere. I could clean it up, put a cover on it, put it up, and have people buy it. But once they buy a bad book, why the hell should they read anything else I write?
Sure.
The enemy of perfect is, what's that phrase? The enemy of perfect is good enough. Ultimately, you have to settle for good enough, because perfect is never going to happen. So throwing all of these cool ideas in the perfect book, it just doesn't work. So trying to boil everything down to the absolute necessities, I guess you would say that's the hardest part of world building. What do you cut? What do you keep? And that's not always an easy question to answer. Ice dragons, okay, that's easy to cut. Inga as an anti-hero on a story of revenge, that Inga almost made it into this book. But ultimately, that particular story was not as good as hopefully people think this book is, because this book's a lot more personal, a lot more individual. And like I said, I used the word intimate earlier. You watch her literally crawl out of a pile of corpses. You can't get any more intimate than that. Some of the sights and the smells and the imagined things, I've never crawled out of a pile of corpses before. But the best I could do was trying to get readers to feel that. That ultimately, when I came up with that scene, I'll admit personally, I felt like, okay, this is the direction we need to go, and this is the story I've been wanting to tell. That's how small we've gone from all-powerful, know everything, start a World War character, to just somebody trying to live their life who literally, what do you do after the worst day of your life? That's ultimately what Deathbringer is. What does somebody do after living the worst day of their life? There's your clip notes. That'll go on the new cover.
William Jeffrey Rankin had a question about the book. He asked if they did an interior design update as well.
I'll admit, there's a if anybody wants to go there, it's MiblArt.com. They're a really any dealings I've had with them has been super nice. I believe they're out of the Ukraine, actually, of all places. So but they offer a whole bunch of different packages. They're actually it's MiblArt. I'm just going to call them that. There's an even cheaper version that they run called GetCovers.com, and then there's a third. Admittedly, I did not even look into it, because now we're talking like specific, like you can go down to the super premium level of what they sell. They can get like super detailed. Maybe they do interior design. I have no idea. They offered a package for an ebook and a paperback cover, mostly because I don't know. I haven't looked into how to get hardcovers printed. So I knew I needed a hard copy and an electronic, and they sold a package for a certain amount, and it's unlimited edits once you pay. So I was like, hey, that's perfect. Again, Way Immortals came out so well that I was like, let's go back again. Excuse me. And I just went with them for pretty much the exact same package. So I do not know the answer to that question, but you could reach out to them. They've got a Twitter account. They've got a contact page. Sorry to kick it back over in your court, but ask them what can it hurt? What they can do is say no, or they can say yes, or they can say no, we don't, but we know someone else who does. Maybe you'll get one of those three answers. It's worth reaching out to try to find out.
But they didn't do Deathbringers.
They did not do anything interior. Was me.
Okay.
It was a very much a learning process. Mike Gallagher, who did the first Deathbringer cover, was super nice, going above and beyond. I cannot say anything but good things about that man. He was willing to make the first interior for Deathbringer. There's actually something I've always thought was kind of neat. I don't know where he came up with it, but the chapter headings with the sword through it, really, really neat. I don't know how he did it. I'm not a designer guy, but the ebooks don't have it. But I was able to figure it out with Way Immortals, and I've still got Deathbringer's interior. So I may reach out to him to see if he's willing to recreate that for the others. Because again, I would like to keep, the rest of the series as visually consistent as possible. So I will have to reach out to him about that.
Yeah, fun trivia. He did my intro for the Signal.
Oh, nice
videos.
Okay.
So
he's got his fingers in a lot of pies. He does the shoot the devil stuff. He does the both. I think he both contributed, and he does all of the videos for them. They've got their second. I want to say they're getting ready to do an open call for their third groups. For anybody who wants to do submissions for that. I mentioned he's doing interior ads for the Kursova magazine. I submitted a story to them, and thankfully, they very honorably got it. Honor to me, rather, got accepted for their upcoming summer issue. So I may reach out to him about buying ad space in that for for the books I got. I don't think I'll have the sequel done by then. That was the original hope, but that's just life being the way it is. But he does a lot of good stuff. He's actually an author too. His book, Body and Blood, he asked me to read, and I wrote a review for him. Probably the only instance I can think of mixing a Catholic and cyberpunk setting and meshing it, and actually it being worthwhile and an interesting read. Like I said, I'm not Catholic. I got nothing against somebody who does. I grew up thinking I'm thinking that Catholic knights throwing fireballs was a cool thing, from reading Eddings back in the day. So I don't get the whole Catholic non-Catholic schism thing. Yay Jesus, that sort of thing. I'm good for that either way. But but he was able to take a very very Catholic heavy worldview and mix it with cyberpunk and sci-fi, and in the nicest way I can say, make it readable. That book is very readable. It's quite good. Anybody who's interested, from my very very poor summary, should definitely go look for that. But Mike's got his fingers in a lot of pies, and he's definitely around. He's a good guy.
Yeah, I read Body and Blood, and I liked it. There are a couple of things that thematically that I was like, I like it, but I don't know if I can review it. But
Right,
I think especially Catholic readers of the St. Tommy series would really enjoy it for sure. For sure.
Declan Finn, I know, is one, and Arnold Lapointe, who was editor for one of the anthologies I did. I know that he's got a lot of, or I shouldn't say a lot of. I know I've been told he has some Catholic themes and such things in his books. So maybe some more than others. Those were a couple of names I could think of off the top of my head.
Yeah. I haven't read Chalk yet. I've read some of Anar Lapointe's other stuff and reviewed it. But I think Chalk is probably in that same sort of vein. So, yeah. Always good to talk about other people's stuff. Let's get back to you.
I can't steal all the oxygen. Yeah.
Patrick said twice, he said this. He wanted to make sure I didn't miss it. Will we get a sequel or a fuller story to the character and story published in Perips' Christmas 2?
I would say yes, reluctantly, yes, not so much reluctantly as in I don't want to write it, as just more reluctantly, it's just finding time to work on anything. I've finally gotten some of the cobwebs shaken for the Deathbringer sequel, which I've been working on. All of a couple of weeks ago, I was, kind of giving some teaser glimpses of a totally unrelated project that I've been working on, which is sort of a Bloodborne, the Sony PlayStation game Bloodborne meets Homer's The Odyssey, which is a real big story about a guy who kind of loses his way and spends a number of years trying to figure out what's going on about this evil city called Dreadgate. What is it about this place that kind of he's tied to? And he operates as a treasure hunter and goes into Dreadgate to find this treasure that people want. And then he comes back out and he's like, why do I keep getting pulled back to this place? But um, I don't so much not want to write a sequel to that story, to Protector's Gift. It's just finding the time between full-time job and kids and wife and everything else, mostly because if I just had regular run-of-the-mill kids who went to school, and I've got a couple older ones who work part-time, full-time, that sort of thing, I probably would have time for that. I don't have that. I have two autistic boys who require not round the clock care, but a lot of care. So between my wife and I, we haven't had a vacation since before we got married. So put it that way. And our youngest is pushing 7 years old this year. So we are tired. I am tired. I would love to write a story about Protector's Gift. There's the swords of the gods, which are these evil weapons that kind of fall from the sky, like Thor's hammer from was it a Thor movie that did that, where he gets kicked out of Valhalla and the hammer falls and the whole mess is that was sort of the idea I had, where these weapons from these gods who are not all that benevolent kind of fall from the sky, and anybody who gets their hands on ones, their everything is kind of kicked up to 11. So they're stronger, they're faster, they're smarter. But if they were evil people to begin with, that gets kicked up to 11 too. So a character who, like the main character, whose name I've completely blanked out on, I apologize, who's given a weapon to kind of counter that. It's even kind of hinted at, I think, in the story, or it was in the original draft I submitted to you, which was there are other swords out there, so maybe he needs to do something about those swords too. So yeah, that's perfect, tie-in for a sequel. But I don't know what the sequel looks like, and I don't know when I can get to it. So will you get a sequel? Yes. Will it be anytime this side of 2030? I have no idea. So I will keep my options open. If Katie does a Periapsis Christmas 3, if I pronounce that right, maybe I'll be able to submit something for that. There's more legs to that story. I don't write that many stories that are just one off and done. I have done them. I'll do them again, but that one's definitely got more in the tank. I just don't know when I'll be able to get to it, unfortunately.
I'm pretty sure you pronounced Christmas correctly, so.
Yeah, yes. Thank you. I practiced that. The other one, not quite so sure. But Christmas, I'm pretty sure I
No,
got
you
right.
you did. It was fine.
Okay, I'll take it. Where does that word come from?
Oh, so it's kinda nerdy. So are you ready for this?
Yeah, go for it. We've been talking about swords for the last hour, so
Let's
go
talk
for it.
about
Hit me.
planets.
Yeah.
So in science, right,
Mhm,
when you have 2 orbiting bodies, when they reach their closest point in the orbit, that's
mhm.
periapsis.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Yeah. So
Interesting. Okay.
2 planets, a planet and a moon, a planet and a sun, anything that orbits it will have that
It will
spot.
have a periapsis moment. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
did- I had seen the word around, but I couldn't remember it. So I figured that if I had a chance, I'd turn tables on you and ask you a question.
I've gotten better at explaining it in a simple way.
Mhm.
But, it's I think it's fun because it's space, right?
Right.
Space stuff. Uh, and I review sci-fi and fantasy, but it's also, like, how close can you get to, like, the ideal, right? So
My my almost 7-year-old, one of the autistic kids, is all about space all the time. So he's got space T-shirts and
nice.
space pajamas, and there are probably 10 different sets of planets in our house. He is all about space. So I will have to tell my wife that. That's very interesting.
That's fun. Yeah. Uh, William Trevor Rankin says, "Science."
Hail science. Good news, everyone.
And Michael Caine is like, "Orbital mechanics." So very
Well, now you're just
yeah.
making it sound smart.
That's exactly what I was gonna say.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. I am gonna look at my list of questions and see if I had
Oh,
anything
sure.
that I wanted to absolutely hit tonight. Oh, I wanted to ask you, so I asked this in the written interview as well, because
Mhm,
your story in Swords and Maidens uh, was also a revenge story,
mhm.
but it has like a very different thematic conclusion. Whereas Deathbringer has more of a like open-ended, probably because it's the first in the series, right?
Right.
And not very judgy, or like coming to a conclusion about revenge, which is common for revenge stories. Uh,
Mhm.
it was very interesting to me and reassuring when I read your short story, and I was like, "Oh, so he doesn't think that just revenge is going to be okay necessarily morally."
Oh, so comforting in that, yeah, there's a reason for the revenge, and not everything has to be all death, gloom, and darkness, and George
Yeah.
R. R. Martin, rah, rah, rah.
Yeah.
Go
Do you want to just
go
talk a
go
little
doom and
bit
gloom
about those?
doom and gloom now, doom and gloom forever. Yeah. The the story from Swords and Maidens. I'm gonna just wander off on a tangent here for a second. Um, the way I learned to write had nothing to do with sitting down at a keyboard and a word processor and writing a bunch of crap before I figured out how to make it less crappy. I learned how to write back in the 90s when AOL was America Online. People don't even know what AOL is anymore. When American Online was very much ascendant, it was one of the first ways that people found out what the internet was. If you're from around the block as much as I have, and you remember America Online, you may even remember when they charged you an hourly fee to get onto America Online. That's how old I am. So I stumbled upon the role playing rooms, which is to say these are rooms that people would go in and they would create a character. It's sort of D&D. It's sort of everybody gets down and just writes stories. Some of it involves rolling dice. That was the whole original idea, but that's not what I did. I still to this day remember some of these admittedly very bad two-dimensional characters that I wrote back in the day, and meeting a whole bunch of other people who wrote characters as well. And you would all group together, and ultimately they decided to call those guilds, as in back in the medieval town where you had the merchants guild or the this guild or that guild or whatever. People who wrote in a similar group together of a similar storyline were in a guild. So to bring it back to present day, the story of Three Swords has to do with guilds and a trio of characters who create a guild called the Three Swords, and they go off adventuring and dungeon plunging, and they go and fight dragons and that sort of thing. Everything that you would imagine the cliche adventurers group to be. That's where the term guild in my imagination came from, was from that. So the story in Three Swords is it's a husband and a wife who are retired. They don't go adventuring anymore. They've hung up, their sword belts for the last time, and they're trying to make a life going legit, for lack of a way to phrase it. The problem is that the husband had a sister who dies. And I know I noted this in the written version, but I want to phrase it, and just in case he ever potentially sees this, is to N.R. LaPointe. I profoundly apologize, because when I was asked to contribute a story to Swords and Maidens, it needed to have a maiden in it. But the problem was my brain does what it always does, which is, what kind of story has a maiden in it without having a maiden in it? It's one of those stupid things that my brain does, is that everybody wants to go zigging while I want to zag. So what kind of story in the Swords and Maidens doesn't have a maiden in it? So the husband and the wife, the third of their trio was the husband's sister, and she's dead before the story starts. And then as the story progresses, the story literally starts in media res, where the husband is kind of looking over their old adventuring gear, because he's heard that the one that murdered his sister has been located, so he's going to go get his revenge. And he's not the point of view character, is his wife is the point of view character, because she's the one that has to watch him go off and kind of relive their glory days, when she's saying, "What are you doing? We're old." Even in I think one of the original drafts, they had children that ultimately got taken out, just for brevity. But we're trying to live our life and put the past behind me. Why do you want to dredge up all of this old stuff that we've kind of gotten past? And then things progress, and the story happens. And I'm not going to spoil anything, because you should totally go buy the collection and read all the other stories in it, including mine. You can totally read mine 3 times if you want. But by the end of the story, it's a question of, was the revenge worth it? And ultimately, the husband has to admit, no, it wasn't. It wasn't worth, everything that they go through, and everything that they sacrifice, and all of the loss that they experience together to some degree. He has to apologize, because he's so fixated on that. Again, men and women thinking differently. He has to apologize because he thinks about it in a certain way without taking her feelings and emotions and her into consideration. So revenge is a plot that can go either way. It can be something where it kind of consumes your life, and then you have to decide, was it worth it? Or it can consume your life, and you can say, yes, it was worth it, because in our Christian worldview, revenge is not something for us to take. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, as the verse goes. But Deathbringer doesn't live in a world where vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. She can have her revenge, or she can just lay down and die. And she ultimately decides, I'm not going to do one, I'm going to do the other. So revenge can be a good motivator for a story without it becoming all-encompassing and dark and depressing and, oh my God, why am I reading this? And that sort of thing. There can be so many better ways to use it as a dark theme without the story ultimately being nothing but grim dark. That's what I think. So ultimately, that's what the short story is about. It's the same idea kind of flipped on its head, which is, instead of revenge being the all-encompassing reason for it, it sort of becomes that, and then the characters have to determine, was that necessarily the right choice? And I don't think that I think they ultimately, they probably decide, no, it wasn't the right choice. But they've lived through it, and they have to survive it and figure out how to get through it together.
All right. Thank you so much.
Oh, no problem.
I really enjoy talking with you guys one-on-one like this, author types, about your books. And I'm really...
So you try to find simpler ways to boil down the periapsis thing, and then you ask authors to come on, and all we're good at is just diarrhea of the mouth, just rambling nonstop. Blah, 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 blah. So I'm not sure those two things jive, but I'm thank you for letting me come on anyway and ramble about Swords and Revenge for almost an hour and a half. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I think that my larger philosophy, right, is that things that are useful for readers are going to be more along the lines of reviews and then talking about books in ways that are accessible, talking about the narrative and about cool elements that they're going to come across when they read your story, and just trying not to get in too much in the weeds of like actual writing advice and stuff like that. So
Right.
if I can write a review and say, I enjoyed this book, and then have the author on to talk about it and, and geek out a little bit with other people, I think that's fantastic. And I think
Right.
it's all serving the same purpose. So
I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully this will not be the last time that we talk about Deathbringer and Inga's story and such things. I mean, it's gonna take me writing it. Unfortunately, that's always the worst part. But there is more coming. Put it that way. I have plans. I have hopefully I will not pull a Stephen King and end up with, or even a George Martin, and end up with a story that I'm not able to end gracefully. I know how the story begins. I know how it ends. It's my fondest, profound, strongest hope that everybody here and 100 of their friends and 100 of their friends and so on and so forth find the book, and it breaks out and it's ginormous and I sell 1 million copies. But better than not was this just sitting on a hard drive somewhere waiting for the answer to that billionth query letter that never came. So that's ultimately why why it's self-published the way it is that pardon the phrasing, but you can shit or get off the pot. It was ultimately time to get it out there and let people find it, and they could love it or hate it or just not care about it. It needed to be told. This is the story that's been with me the longest, and if it's the only story I finish, I have to finish it. So there is more coming. I think it's a trilogy. It was planned as 4 books. I think it's down to 3. That doesn't necessarily mean there won't be other stories in this particular world, but as of right now, February 12th, 2024, it is a trilogy at the moment. So there are 2 more books coming.
Awesome. All right. Well, I promised people that I would do a giveaway to end this stream. Thank you guys all so much for coming. I appreciated all of your questions and your comments. So I have 4, 5, 6, 14 entries. This is going to be a $15 Amazon gift card. I just need to do it. Whoops. I wonder if I'm able to. You guys can watch. What do you think of that?
Oh, is there any more spoiler stuff I can think of to tell?
Look at this. Random winner.
There we are. All right, let's see who gets it.
Ben. Is it Chris or Crease?
Christ, maybe?
Congratulations. All right. I will reach out to you on Twitter. Yeah, there he is.
All right.
And I will I'll get that to you. And
thanks for coming to watch me ramble about swords and everything.
I had a wonderful time. And again, we did a written interview prior to this, and that will be posted to my website tomorrow. So if you're interested in some more of my questions for Blake that we didn't get to today, or for a more structured interview.
And I did try to come up with different answers for the conversation here, so hopefully there's not as much overlap as hopefully I managed to avoid that. That's what I'm trying.
Yeah. Ben says that he will start with purchasing your book.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping for, but I'll take it. I would say again, if you like the new cover, put a hold on it for until Wednesday the 14th. That's when the change will go live, unless you just want the old cover and then you want to buy the new cover. I certainly won't complain about that.
Yeah. You know what? I'll throw that cover back up if I can.
E-version and paperback. I'll admit I don't know how to make hard copies, so hardcover rather. So I may look into that when the sequel comes along, and then we'll just have a hard copy, because I know some people like to have the hardcover version. I haven't looked into it. I've just been busy with other stuff, but there is a paperback and the e-version.
All right.
I've tried to keep the price as low as possible, because people have things to spend money on. So the ebook, I think, now is priced at $3. Paperback is $10.
Very nice.
$9.99 technically, $2.99 and $9.99. But yeah, $3 and $10. So that's the lowest I was able to keep it. With Amazon's pricing being the way it is.
All right. Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Blake, again. And as always, I encourage you guys to try indie alternatives to the mainstream slop, and to leave reviews when you finish them. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Buy my book. Bye.